What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning back into the channel today. It took us, a month, Travis?
Or
Almost?
so, yeah. A few, yeah. Who's keeping track?
A lot of people that follow this channel are keeping track. And they've been asking me what happened
The
to Travis.
multitudes. The
Yeah,
multitudes want to know.
they were wondering, man, if something happened or, if you were okay. I told him, I said, man, I hadn't been able to get a hold of him. I don't know what he's doing. But no, we're back together tonight, and we're going to look at the consistency of Jesus and Paul. And what we mean by that, we've been walking through the Olivet Discourse and showing how it can't be divided. We've talked about some of the previous divisions at verse 29. We talked about really how this generation forces some things in there. And what we want to look at tonight is something that was very important for me in my journey as far as eschatology goes, as far as preterism goes. This is something I think that has tremendous weight and tremendous merit. I want to ask Travis, before we start this, give me some passages or some thoughts or concepts that were really, really important to you in your journey in eschatology toward preterism.
Well, I think the initial, before I even knew what any form of preterism was, or to be honest with you, the majority of my Christian life, I didn't know there was a 70 AD or anything significant. So I think I guess first major shift was just learning about these events and that first century fulfillment, the wars and rumors of wars and the famines and, all of those things from guys like Jeff Durbin and Gary DeMar and, Philip Kaiser, and I'm sure many more that we'll mention. Ken Gentry was super instrumental in that, as was Doug Wilson. So that was kind of the first, that introduction to the partial preterism. And then I would say as I continued to move along, the biggest hang up for me, which I think is very pertinent to this conversation, was the fact that all these partial preterists are saying, yeah, there was a coming, there was a parousia, but it was a spiritual one in 70 AD, and there's still one yet to come. So in my mind, the question when we really started thinking about it was, well, on what basis do you split that parousia and make it a two-part deal? Like this is parousia part A, but
Right.
part B is still yet to come. And I think that when you really start thinking through and digging in and looking at the passages that you say, okay, I'm pretty decidedly convinced this is AD 70.
Yep.
Okay, now let's compare it to these over here. And I think that you begin to see that, well, they're all the same event. It's the same language. Paul's quoting Jesus and so on and so forth. So
I think that's why Mike Sullivan always talks about that what he's essentially done in his eschatology, because he's always dealing with the Reformed camp, which is a lot of on mills and a lot of post mills, and he's always telling them, even in House Divided and all of that, they're saying they've taken the all mill thought, which was that this is one event, with which is not really that popular now with a lot of modern day all mills, by the way, but the all mill thought that it's all one event with the partial preterist thought of 80-70, and when you combine those together, then you form our position in full preterism. But I think really what, Travis, you're getting at is it just took some time, because once you see one thing is 80-70, you get to a point eventually where you say, man, if one of them's in 80-70, then every bit of this is in 80-70. Is that true for you?
Yeah, I think you shift from the question being, okay, what is AD 70 to the question being, what's not?
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to be consistent, you're going to find that it all is.
Yeah, that's the way that I feel about it too. This passage today was extremely important for me. Hey, while we're here, why don't you tell everybody the first time I told you, I said, hey, man, I'm pretty sure the second coming happened. I want you to tell everybody what you did.
Well, have you ever seen the Paul Washer clip where he goes, blasphemy? That's pretty much my response. I didn't talk to Zach really for a couple weeks because I'd always been told you're full preterist, you're a heretic, and so that was my initial thought. And then I thought, you know what? I've known this guy since we were kids. Zach used to live next door to me when we were children. Most of your multitudes probably don't know that. You ought to dig up some pictures. But
I'll share one time.
Anyway, I thought, man, I've
The
known this
next
guy.
time,
Huh?
the next time we do this, I'm gonna have that picture of me and you at the fair on here.
There you go. But anyway, I thought, man, I've known this guy a long time. I don't know anybody that takes his study as serious as him, and I know he's a man of integrity. So I thought, well, let's hear him out. Let's talk. And so here we are.
All right, here we are. Let's do it. The Olivet Discourse cannot be divided. Part 3. Let's compare Jesus and Paul. Travis, you want to read for us?
Yeah, Matthew
First from
24,
there.
30, and 31 says, Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds. Our faces are in the way. From the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. There you go.
All right. Let me just ask you, kind of walk through me with this just a little bit right here. When it says all the tribes of the earth, what do you do with that? What are you doing with tribes of the earth there?
Well, I think your typical gut response is going to be that means the whole wide world. After all, he's got the whole world in his hands. But as you know, whenever we look at the Greek, it's the word ge or gay, ge, and oftentimes it's just simply translated land, and it's always associated with Israel, which makes sense because who are tribes in the Bible?
Right.
Gentiles?
No.
Right.
Yeah, so that's Revelation 1:7 when it says he's coming on the clouds, every eye will see him, even they who pierced him, all the tribes of the earth, gay, will mourn because of him. So yeah, same. Okay, what about coming on the clouds? What do you do with that? If you're saying that's AD 70, first century, who are some people, Travis, that take this as AD 70, first century? Matthew 24, 30, and 31. Like, is this uncommon for me and you to take this first century, or what?
It's not, because again, you're going to have a lot of your partial preterist guys that are saying this was a spiritual coming, right? And they're right, by the way. They just think there's more to come. But I think that these specific verses, if I remember, our friend Mike made a chart, just kind of comparing all those guys that signed the Gary DeMar letter. And I believe Milton Terry and Philip Kaiser for sure were two that would say this was 70 AD. But well, we'll just leave it at that because I can't. Do you remember any other ones?
Well, Matthew 24:30. There was a bunch of them. I mean, Ken Gentry was taking that.
I thought Doug Wilson took the entire thing up to like half of 25 as being.
He does,
70.
and then Keith Matheson would fall in that mix. I mean, there's the whole squad and gamut just about are going to take this section right here as something that happened in AD 70. And that's so important for what we're doing tonight in this video, because if this section here is AD 70, then when you start comparing the rest of scriptures and your eschatological passages that are so important, which we're fixing to compare Jesus to Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5, then you're going to see how all of this stuff falls into play. And you guys can understand how we come to the conclusion that this is one coming. So Travis, if that's AD 70, what's coming on the clouds? What did that look like, say, in the Old Testament?
So that's one of those. I think in that last video, we touched on some of that cosmological language. It may have been the first one, but we talked about the sun, moon, and stars, and how that was symbolic apocalyptic imagery, as was heaven and earth. And this is no different. So in the Jewish mind, when they read coming on the clouds, well, they would have associated that with God. So if you even go back all the way to the tabernacle, when they would come into the Ark of the Covenant, you can read passages and it always says God appeared in the clouds, right? He appeared in a cloud before the people. They actually knew him as the great cloud rider, which was a title that he kind of stole from Baal or Baal, however you want to say it. But I think the clearest example of this, if I recall, and you may have to correct me, but I think it's Isaiah 19.
That's where I was.
Yep, and it's where you see God pronounce to Egypt that he's coming in judgment. He's fixing to smack them, and he says he's going to be riding on a swift cloud. So you've got a promise of judgment where God is coming on the clouds. Well, next chapter, what you see is that God sends the Assyrian army in, wipes out Egypt, thus prophecy fulfilled. So did God literally God who is spirit, did he come down from heaven, on a surfboard, or did he have a parachute and ride on a literal physical cumulus cloud? No.
No.
The way that the Jews used that language was the cloud coming was God sent an army to judge a nation.
Yep.
And that's how they understood this language.
That's exactly what that says. That was good. Thank you.
Yeah. And so let me say this too, because when I preached to this, I brought this up. That being the case, if that's how these Jewish guys would have understood that, we have no right whatsoever. Somebody needs to show me an exegetical reason to not understand this verse that same way. Why would we rip the audience relevance factor out and understand this to mean a literal physical body is coming down out of heaven? We have no basis to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Okay, then it says in verse 31, he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. And when we hear trumpet, I had somebody tell me yesterday they were still waiting on that last trumpet. And I asked him, I said, man, I hadn't heard the first 6 yet. I mean, what are we doing? When you correct me and add to this if I'm wrong, when I read this about trumpet in the Olivet Discourse, which obviously many people are saying 80, 70, a lot of these, especially these partial preterist post-millennial guys, when I'm reading that, I'm connecting that to that Jewish cultist, to that Jewish world, possibly even, the Feast of Trumpets, the 5th feast day. So that's where my mind goes. Is that where your mind goes in that as well?
It is, and I think the imagery even of the feast day, and I may be wrong on this, but I think that comes from the story of Jericho, where they go in and they surround the city and circle it, and they blow the trumpets, and the city goes down. Well, that's their first major victory as they're conquering the land, right? As they're entering into the land of Canaan. And so I think that's where the feast day develops that imagery from as well. And that's a picture of, when Christ returns, he fulfills that with the, literal audible trumpet blast, right?
Yeah.
And then anyway, so I think that's the imagery that you get there.
Yeah. So, and if that's the picture, if we're right in following that, then Jericho happened on the backside of the Exodus at the 7th trumpet or the last trumpet. Therefore, at the fall of Jerusalem. Now, let's think about this way too. If you're watching this, Canaan represented the presence of God. So once the last trumpet blew and the city went down, then they entered Canaan, the presence of God. Well, once the 7th trumpet blew, then the city went down. That was the sign of his coming. Then the resurrection happened. That's why the next part of this verse says, then they will gather together as elect. That's right. And that's the exact same imagery. I would also add here, if this trumpet is 80, 70, then where in the world, on what basis do we have to spread out different trumpets? How can I make the trumpets in 1 Thessalonians 4 or the trumpet in 1 Corinthians 15 be separate from this trumpet? How do I do that? Am I playing with 14 trumpets or 21 trumpets? I mean, is that the route that we're going? If we're also saying that this has a connection to the Old Covenant economy, to this Judaic system, then what do the trumpets that are in the future, what do they have to do with?
That's right.
And I think that's an issue. So when I'm reading these passages, and then we go to comparing them to passages like the next one, then I start seeing some issues that are in the text. I'll read this one. It says, 1 Thessalonians 4:16. So we read Jesus. Now here's Paul. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. First thing I would note here, Travis, is just simply the audience relevance with how Paul is using we. He expected some of them to be alive. That's no different than what Jesus said in Matthew 16, 27 and 28. He said, some of you are standing here who won't taste death till the Son of Man comes. John 21, Jesus said, Peter, what's it matter to you if John's still alive whenever I come? That's all to me seems to fit perfectly, consistently, and exegetically.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
All right, now here's a question though, Travis. Tell me some preterist approaches then. If this is the rapture passage, let's talk about this just for a second. What are preterists doing with this as far as the rapture goes? Because this says those who are alive will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Does this correct me if I go ahead?
So here's the way that I would have answered this. I think if I remember right, I got to shake some cobwebs at this point, but as a partial preterist, what I would have told you was this was after this post-millennial, Christianization where we've taken the world over and everyone that's ever going to come to Christ does. Then he literally physically comes down out of heaven, right, to come into his kingdom. And what I would have done with specifically verse 17, because this language has to do with like welcoming a king, it's going out to meet him and then welcome him into the city, so to speak. So I would have said, yeah, this is a rapture of sorts where we go up in the air and then come back down with Jesus as he comes to physically rule for eternity in this kingdom.
Yeah.
Now,
the
issue here with that view, that's all fine and dandy if you want to believe that, but your problem is verse 16 and what we were just talking about in the Olivet Discourse. Is that where you're about to go with this?
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it goes back to the trumpet thing, and what blast is this? Is this a different set? Are there 14 or 21 trumpets, or is this the same event?
Yeah.
And if Christ comes on a cloud and there's a trumpet blast, and we're seeing here that he descends from heaven and there's a trumpet blast, that seems to be saying the same thing.
Okay. I'm with you. I agree. So that's a partial preterist interpretation. So a lot of partial preterists, like Ken Gentry, are going to say, 1 Thessalonians 4, this passage is in the future. What we just read in Matthew chapter 24, in verses 30 to 31, that's AD 70. So let's hit. We said
Now,
what
this was the one Kaiser. This was the one Kaiser takes as 70.
Yes. So
where he's kind of different than the rest of them.
Yeah. So a partial preterist, Philip Kaiser, he takes this passage to be AD 70. And what he thinks happens here, he thinks there were physical bodies. The last I checked, the best of my understanding, he accused me of not understanding what he believed, but that's neither here nor there. That's a topic for another day. Anyway, he thinks that physical bodies came out of the ground in AD 70. When it says, then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them, he doesn't think a physical rapture happened in AD 70. He thinks that's speaking of after AD 70, whenever a Christian died, they went to heaven. That's the best that I understand his position. Now, here's the way that some full preterists understand this position. They think that the dead who are in Hades went to heaven at this point, and that there was a physical rapture. So there are preterists, full preterists, who teach there was a physical rapture during this passage, just like the other people think is in mine and your future. Me personally, I reject that. I don't think that's what this passage is talking about. I think this is talking about the same gathering as Matthew 24 and what we just referenced. So when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, we shall not all sleep or die. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in the moment, in a twinkling of an eye. I don't think that has anything to do with anything physical that happened during this time in AD 70. I believe this is something that is spiritual and covenantal. This is the full transformation into seeing Christ face to face. That's why the dead in Hades at that time can go into the presence of God. And that's why the living at that moment are changed, because the law is fully fulfilled. Would you agree with?
I would. So you're saying that for those who were alive at the parousia in 70, this was an internal spiritual change.
And I would point you to 1 Corinthians 13. This 1 Corinthians 13 passage has been so important for me. I don't know how this keeps coming up so much in everything that I think covenantally. When Paul said, now we see him in a mirror dimly, but then we shall see him face to face. Well, all the time, everybody's always talking about face to face, like me and you aren't face to face, but I can see your face.
Right.
Well, they weren't walking around with a mirror with a dimly picture of Jesus in the first century. That's not what he's talking about. The redemptive process had begun, but they were awaiting the fullness of redemption and awaiting the fullness of salvation. When Christ fulfilled all of the law, then that was complete, and everyone in him, whether Jew or Gentile, who was alive, was covenantally restored to God, meaning they were back in his presence. That's why from AD 70 on, when the Christian dies, he goes to heaven to be with the Lord. Revelation 14:13, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. They will enter their rest. That's the way that I understand it. I realize people are different, but I think me and you are close to that. Are we?
Yeah, I think so. I think, if you remember the Kelly Nelson Burke series, when he explained this, I mean, he took that same view, I believe, but he did something with the word air and showed how in the Hebrew, that word basically originated with the inner man, like where breath comes from, where your air comes from.
Yeah.
And he said that was the point. This is being harpazo, or snatched together in the cloud in the presence of God in the
Yeah.
inner man, and that's the point. It's a spiritual reality.
Yeah.
It's
I
not this
just
physical thing.
maybe just like we do with resurrection, that we see so physical
Mm-hmm.
that we've got to be whole Bible students. Now, some of you all at this point are watching this saying, okay, well, what's the point here? Well, the next slide's the point, and it's the chart. So hopefully you guys can see this. Let me modify this screen a little bit, Travis, to make sure everybody can
I
kind of see
think
what's
to
going
kind of
on.
clarify why we even have this chart up, because we're talking again, our entire umbrella discussion is why you can't divide the discourse, right? Or is the discourse divided? Well, on the left column there, Matthew 24, all these partial preterist guys are going to agree for the most part that all these things were 70 AD. But on the right side of the screen, some of them say that's this future thing and some don't. And so what we're saying is these are the same events. It's using the exact same language. And so there's no justifiable reason to make that division.
Yeah. So if Matthew 24 is 80-70, then 1 Thessalonians 4 has to be 80-70. There's no other way around this. And this, I mean, respect to the futurists who aren't partial preterists, I mean, at least they're consistent on this, because this is the tension I think that a lot of people see, but not a lot of people want to battle. People are messaging me all the time saying, man, listen, I'm seeing what you're seeing. He's like, we just never really knew what to do with it. And I never read I never read a full preterist interpretation of anything until I was convinced biblically I cannot harmonize this. Let me see what some of these guys are doing with some of these passages to at least see if it fits and can they back it up with the text. So in Matthew 24:30 and 1 Thessalonians 4:16, Christ returns. He returns from heaven. He's accompanied by his angels with the trumpet of God. Believers are gathered to Christ, and he comes in the clouds. And if you can, with a justifiable manner, with Matthew 24 saying it happens in this generation, and Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4 saying, we who are alive and remain, giving clear timing indicators, man, if you can, number one, think that that's in mind in your future, kudos to you. I can't get there exegetically. And let me just make this point too. Travis, you probably feel this way. I want people who are studying to see this, because there are people with legitimate questions I think we can help answer by seeing some of this stuff. My goal, even in making this channel, is not to convert everybody to be a full preterist. That's not even my goal in my own church. I just want, if we're studying and we have these questions, though, I want to help those who are looking and want to see it. I'm not out to make war on everybody and wage war. The only time I care about doing that is when somebody wants to come after us to make a response video. So that's the way I view it. But
or name call, right?
Yeah, or name call. We get that a lot. But nonetheless, I digress. When we see these passages, we're saying that's the same event. That's one event, and that's in my past.
And that's the only one event that, even in the other passages we could go to, like 1 Corinthians, there are several of this identical language there too, and they're all pointing to one thing.
Yeah.
And the issue with trying to split it and say, yeah, the left side of the screen was spiritual 70, the right side is physical future. Well, I know we're going to get into this probably in maybe the next video or the one after. But in Luke 21, he says that these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that's written. Well, if you're going to hold that as 70 and all that's written is fulfilled in 70, then how in the world are you going to say 1 Thessalonians 4 isn't and it's still future? That is super inconsistent, and the text won't allow you to do that.
Yeah, and that Luke 21:22 passage you just referenced connects perfectly to Daniel 9:24 to seal up vision and prophecy, which, by the way, would happen. 70 weeks were determined for his people, his holy city. 1 Corinthians 15 connects the defeat of death to the connection to the law. So it's all this. I mean, it's literally all right there if we're looking for it. Okay, so Paul and Jesus are in complete agreement on their eschatology. There's no doubt Paul has heard it. Paul's got his eschatology from Jesus. I mean, you think about even 1 Corinthians 15, you've got angels there, you've got the trumpet there, you've got the gathering there, you've got the return there, you've got the clouds there. You have everything that's in 1 Thessalonians 4 also in 1 Corinthians 15. We could have put that chart in here, but we didn't do it for this one. But you could also connect this to Matthew 16. There's the angels at Matthew 16. There's the judgment in Matthew 16, 27, and 28. You have all of the same elements and placing them in the context of the original audience and hearers.
Jesus in Luke 23, when I don't think it's in Luke's telling, but it's in maybe John 19. I can't remember. I should have looked it up. But he's on trial before Caiaphas, and he tells Caiaphas, you, and it's plural tense, so he's speaking to them as corporately, right? You, Israel, essentially will see the Son of Man coming with his angels, coming on the clouds. And it's the exact same thing. Well, who are the you? I mean, those guys aren't living today, know?
That's Matthew 26, 64, and 65. That's real good. Because it's the same thing. And really what that's a quote to is Daniel chapter 7 and verse 13. Man, it just all connects. This is what I'm saying, guys. This is such an avalanche. Once you start down this path, you're like, well, man, this is this, and this is this, and this is this. And we could go all day on what's what because it's all there. Mm-hmm. We didn't even put Revelation 14 in this, and we could have. All right, what we got next? How about Matthew 24 in comparison with 1 Thessalonians and chapter 5? Do you have 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 in front of you by any chance, or could you get it? I got it. Let me. I didn't put it in the slideshow, but I think it would be good probably just to hear 1 Thessalonians chapter 5.
All right, where am I going?
I'd say read 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and then go all the way through. I don't know. I'd say read the first 11 verses maybe.
Okay.
Just get a feel for it.
This is the elect standard version for all your viewers. Okay, 1 Thessalonians 5, starting in 1. Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night.
All right. Go ahead.
You want me to keep going?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I won't stop you.
You're good. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then, let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night. Those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we might live with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing.
All right. So from this point, we want to compare 1 Thessalonians 5 to the rest of Matthew 24. This is really the best spot that we could put this in here for now, because we're going to get into why it can't be cut at verse 35 and 36 in our next video the next time. So on your chart, if you're looking with me here on the screen, it saith, the time was unknown in Matthew 24:36. Well, same with 1 Thessalonians 5. There's a thief coming in verse 2, just like in Matthew 24:43. Unbelievers were unaware of the judgment in both passages. Judgment was like pain on an unexpected mother. Let me go back and read, Travis, Matthew chapter 24 and verse 8, because this birth pang analogy is all over the place. Creation was groaning with birth pangs, waiting for the sons of God to be revealed. It depends on which translation you have. I actually have the ESV with me here too. Yeah, it says this in Matthew 24:8. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. So if you're going to say, well, Matthew 24:8's in the first century, then how in the world can you not say 1 Thessalonians 5:3 is too, when Paul said it was? I mean, this isn't, you have to be consistent. And this is the problem, consistency. Okay, the believers wouldn't be deceived in the Olivet Discourse and Paul's writing. The believers were to be watchful, and there were warnings against drunkenness in both of them there. It seems insurmountable to me.
I think if someone can't see this, they may be looking in a mirror dimly. I'm just saying. They need to clean it off, because we're looking at a reflection in 1 Thessalonians 5 here.
I don't have any doubt that Paul and Jesus were thinking about the exact same thing.
Yeah.
All right, let's do one more. Let's look at Matthew 25:31. Now, I know this is jumping way ahead, but guys, the reason we want to do this, because I hear people all the time, well, Matthew 25:31, this judgment's in our future, even though Matthew 24 was 80-70, the 30 to 31 passage in Matthew 24. If you can't split it from any of the rest of it, then you can't split it from this. Matthew 25:31. Travis, you want to read it?
When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats.
All right, one more chart just for funsies. The Son of Man comes in Matthew 25:31 and 24:30. He comes in glory. He comes with the angels. He gathers from the nations, and there's judgment.
So what's cool about this chart is, just like our partial preterist friends wanted to separate Matthew 24 and 1 Thessalonians, they also want to separate Matthew 24 and Matthew 25. Some do. I've had people tell me Matthew 25 is not part of the Olivet Discourse. Now, I think, and I may be wrong here, but I think Doug Wilson takes like half of 25 to be 70 and then the end of it to be future.
I wish I could find where that's at. I'm almost positive I've heard him say that.
Yeah.
Doug, when you watch this, I apologize. I apologize. All 14 of us full preterists, we're trying to figure out where you cut the discourse at. So
yeah, you've got 1/7 of us here. We want to know.
But I would just simply say that it's a recapitulation, just like the Book of Revelation does. So he simply starts over at the beginning of 25, which we'll get there. I know you've preached those texts and those passages, some of that at the beginning. When we get to the beginning of 25, we'll talk about how and why we think it's in the first century, and how this culminates back up to 80-70 to get this judgment. Now, what's important, I think, too, here is that, if you're going to take a passage such as 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and make that be 80-70 like Philip Kaiser does, how can we not take this passage and the end of Revelation 20 to be the same judgment if all of the same elements are there? That's something, man, that I just struggle with.
Well, here's one other thing I would say about this chart that you've got up here. At the end of 24 is where Jesus is telling them, he's given the analogy of the thief in the night and not being drunk, but being sober, being alert, right? And his point to his first century audience is be ready. And that's the point. Well, when you get into Matthew 25, he tells two parables, the 10 virgins and the talents. And the point of both of those is be ready. That the entire point is, I'm coming back within a generation, but it's going to be at a time you don't know, right? You're going to know the labor pains have started, or the birth pangs, when you see wars, rumors of wars, famines. So there's your signal. You better get ready, because I'm coming back at a time you don't know. And then at the end of 25, it's just a summary of everything he's just talked about. Like you said, it's just it's a recapitulation, and to not be able to see that, you don't want to see that, in my opinion.
That's the way I felt about it too. And man, we all come to a point in our studies where we say, okay, this is what this has to be consistently. I think the struggle for a lot of people in eschatology is, man, they haven't cross-referenced Matthew 25:31 and 32 with Matthew 24, 30, and 31. They haven't sat down side by side with the Olivet Discourse and what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4. And I'm not saying that, somebody's in sin if they're not there yet. Okay.
Right.
It takes us time. How hard, Travis, have you studied this over the last 2 years?
A lot. More than I care to admit.
Yeah. And that's because we want to figure it out, but if you don't devote the time to it, then it's just going to take longer. And you think about the average people who, somebody that's just sitting in my church, maybe somebody that, is just, maybe they don't even come to Sunday school. Maybe they're just kind of, I don't know, maybe just regular Sunday morning. It's going to take them. Okay. First off, for me, it's going to take me getting to a passage like this because I teach through books of the Bible. So I'm going to get to Matthew 24 and 25 and Matthew 10 and Matthew 13. I'll get there, but that's going to take me a little while. It's going to be a year before I get to Matthew 24 and 25 at the rate I'm going, if not longer. So you've got that. But then even when you do hear it, you're going to have to go apply yourself to a certain area. I firmly admit, I don't think I'm a theological guru in the area of eschatology. I'm not. And I don't ever want to give the perception that I am. But I have studied it enough to feel confident enough to talk about it. There are a ton of areas and things that I have questioned about. I just simply haven't studied yet. That doesn't mean I'm trying to dodge it or avoid it. But I've got to have time to get there to study it. And there are people in eschatology who have been in eschatology for 30, 35 years. They've had time to study this stuff. And they are simply throwing it off, ignoring it, and they're yelling anybody like me and you saying that we're crazy for just comparing scripture with scripture. Bring a book. That's all we're saying.
I think that's sad too, because what you see, I actually saw a post today in a post-millennial Facebook group. A guy, he's talking about Gary DeMar, and he said something. I'm paraphrasing.
Gary DeMar, that heretic.
Yeah, he said Gary DeMar's dead to us in this group. And I'm thinking, boys, if it wasn't for everything he's done, Last Days Madness, American Vision, the past 30 years or so, dealing with the hard questions, dealing with this stuff, none of y'all would be in a post-mill group. You wouldn't know anything. Yeah. Like Gary DeMar's carried a lot of this on his shoulders, and he's had a fantastic reputation. He's been a leader that people look up to, but now he's not answering questions like they want. And immediately, instead of hearing the guy out, this guy that we've esteemed and respected all this time, he's dead to us, right? And I know that personally, and I'm not looking for sympathy here because it's whatever to me, but I've experienced that too. People that I had what I thought were good relationships with are like the people that would have told you I'm an upright guy that studies hard, this and that, and then clean cut. So rather than having a little humble pie and looking at this and hearing it out, it's just those guys are quacks, write them off, let's move on.
And their attempt is to scare people to not even sit down and open the Bible and listen. I remember when David Curtis said that. He said people were telling him, don't even open the Bible. Don't even study the Bible on this area with David Curtis. He's too persuasive and convincing.
Well, I've heard pastors tell their congregations to stop watching YouTube videos.
Yeah, I've heard that one too. So, well, Travis, we'll leave it there for tonight and we'll pick up. Guys, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel down below. Share it. Thanks for all the encouragement and feedback. And thanks to Travis. Travis, I'll buy you lunch one day this week if you'll eat with me.
Okay. That was hard. That was a hard sell.
Yeah, you're normally a sucker for free lunch. So, all right. Take care and God bless.